So, good morning, everybody. My name is John Fisher. I work for an organization called Wayfinders, which is located in Springfield, Massachusetts. That's the western part of Massachusetts, where we normally have the Fair Housing and Civil Rights Conference. Excuse my voice a little bit here. We also have all sorts of plants wonderfully throwing out pollen. And as a result, I've got a little bit of a hoarseness in my throat, but it's not COVID-19, although nothing terribly dramatic should be happening during the workshop. This is one of a series of workshops sponsored by the Fair Housing and Civil Rights Conference, which has been going on for about 15 years or so now. Um, the 2020 conference was supposed to take place on April 24th, but in case any of you maybe didn't notice, somewhere around early March, the world ended, and we're all in a new reality now. So the conference will take place. It will be taking place virtually sometime this fall, and we will let you know. If you're on the mailing list for this workshop or for the conference, you'll get a notice, and certainly we hopefully can get more than the usual 300 to 600 people we get because there's no travel involved. And we nonetheless will try and make it a very interesting conference. In the interim, what we have done is we have started to do a series of workshops on topics that would normally be topics that we would be doing during the conference. But looking at them, initially the lens we started to look at them through was COVID-19 and sort of the new reality that we're all under. And as a matter of fact, we did a workshop earlier, specifically on language access and COVID-19, which I believe you can still access through the conference website. However, obviously something else has happened too, and that all of a sudden questions of racism that have kind of been there forever, but suddenly it's almost as though people's, or at least white people, magically started to talk about it. And they're just because of the whole insanity, terror that's going on right now, that also has become kind of another topic that we have tried to deal with. We have a workshop that's going to be on the 27th, which will be on essentially attorneys, the role of, if you will, lawyering in the present time. Essentially, I think it's called From the Courtroom to the Street. And that will be probably listed. I don't think it's up on the website now, but it'll be up within a day or so. I think it's going to be a very interesting panel. Please register for it. I'm also joined in helping me today by Teresa Dudek, who's been working with us. She's the one waving the hand there, and she will be trying to monitor people's questions. This is going to be a largely didactic presentation, so I'm just going to be going through slides. As a matter of fact, some slides I'm going to slightly skip over, but I want them to be there for you. You can download the slides after this workshop, again, at the conference website. If you look at the very bottom of your screen, https://fhcrconference.com/virtual, you'll find slides there. And so anyway, there's some extra things on the slides that I'm not going to go into in any great length, but sort of they'll be there for you to touch upon. This is an hour workshop, will be done by 12 o'clock. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you have questions, would you please just go to the bottom of your screen and in chat, just ask the question. Tess will take we'll try and follow all the questions, put them together, and then we'll try to deal with them at the end. I think a lot of the topics, that you're going to be asking about, you're going to probably find that we're covered anyway going along. So basically, that's it. This is almost an afterthought. We did the workshop on what an LAP conference, or what an what an LAP planning process would be like, what the special considerations under COVID were. And that really brought up people asking some questions about, well, how do you do a language access plan? So coincidentally, on a work plan for one of my grants, I was going to be putting this together originally, taking it out on the road to some various municipalities, and instead we're going to be doing it this way. So hopefully we're killing two birds with one stone. Okay, so let's get started here. Let's see, everything is working. Oh yeah, the other thing I want to really mention here too is that the slides here are taken from a series of previous workshops I've done, and very often done with co-presenters, usually somewhat longer than this 1 hour quick once over, if you will. Just really thanks to all of these people who would one time or another have taken part in the workshops, or who have otherwise basically given me stuff that I've stolen to use today. Okay, so let's just start out with language access and what it means. And basically, it's kind of all these good things that really, not only are you required to do this, but it just makes where you work, whatever you are, your municipality, your agency, your little huddle of 3 people who are trying to do good in the world, it makes it accessible for other people. And again, this is, there's a link on this. I think if you go to the slides afterwards, but just the point is, everybody's from somewhere else. And by the way, as a friend of mine pointed out, who's Native American, that includes Native Americans. You know, we are all basically an African ape that wandered out of Africa sometime, and it just depended on how fast you could walk and whether there was a land bridge available at the time, as to when you ended up coming here. But we are all immigrants, okay? We are all from somewhere else, whether we came voluntarily or involuntarily. We're new here, and it's always a problem. Again, why do language rights matter? Hey, the US is really becoming a majority minority country. It really, there are really all of these reasons legally, which I'm going to touch on a little bit, but also they're there because it's kind of the right thing to do. I should probably mention, just as an aside, in one of the other hats I wear, I do a lot of international training, a lot of travel. And it really is, a lot of the world knows English and all that sort of stuff, so I have an advantage there. I speak a couple of other languages, but nowhere near well enough to undertake the type of things that would be involved coming into a municipality and asking about whatever, something to do with you know, my property, with the ticket I got, whatever it is, going into an agency where I need to have service, trying to have them understand it. People really need to have access. So the bottom line is, you do it because it's the right thing to do. And again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Massachusetts, about 8.8% of the population. And by the way, I should also mention, I'm in Massachusetts. There will be a Massachusetts leaning towards some of the stuff I'm talking about, but think of it as an example for those of you from the rest of the country, because you've got the same thing wherever you are. But and so much of this is pretty much the same process, whether you're doing it in Northampton, Massachusetts, or Los Angeles, California. So again, Massachusetts has its population of about 6 million people. 8.8% of those people really don't understand, aren't able to write and do the sort of work that you really need to do in English. 22% is actually of the people in Massachusetts, so almost a fifth, approaching a quarter of that 6 million people. English is not the primary language they use at home, even though they may feel comfortable with using it outside of the office. Obviously, depending upon what groups are there, have moved in recently, and by the way, these things keep changing as new groups come in. All of these, there are a number, these are the primary languages in Massachusetts. Again, New Yorkers, 49% of people in New York City speak a language other than English. They may be bilingual to some extent. 200 languages in English. 1.7 million people in New York speak English less than well. Again, these are the demographics that all of us are facing. So why are we talking about it? Number one, it's the law, okay? Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in or benefit of or be subjected to discrimination in anything receiving federal financial assistance. Okay, that means that essentially any agency which has some federal money coming into it is required under this to be able to take that into consideration. Lau v. Nichols, essentially, it really held that people who were LEP, limited English speaking people, had the rights to federally accessed programs, et cetera. So that basically you need to be able to, even if you don't speak English, you need to be able to access the programs. So now I'm going to go through and skip a whole bunch of slides, but they're there in case you want to refer to them. Again, Civil Rights Act, Title VI, 1964. That's the Lau v. Nichols I mentioned. DOJ regulations. In 2000, Bill Clinton issued an order, Executive Order 13166, which says that federal agencies need to develop and implement LEP plans. Alexander v. Sandoval, just be aware that it sort of tweaked a little bit what was under Lau. And so, and again, different states have dealt with this differently, but it's a case you might want to look at. Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, again, prohibits discrimination based on national origin. There's also a concept called affirmatively furthering fair housing, which really talks about HUD monies and so forth. The original version, 2015, have to take proactive steps beyond combating discrimination and foster inclusive communities. The wording has been changed, or I should say there's a proposed change on that right now that is perhaps a little looser in its interpretation, but again, language access is still there. Massachusetts, same thing for us. Look in your own state, you'll see it. Useful, by the way, particularly if you're in Massachusetts, but again, other states, the wording is pretty much there. That's a link that you can use to get to various kinds of, actually a listing of different language access plans in the state of Massachusetts. Again, all municipalities and grantees have to have a language access plan. And by the way, this is a very important piece of this. All programs have to have that. So if you're getting that money, federal or Massachusetts state, every program you have, even if it's a very small program that was, whatever, backed by a private grant or what have you, once you're doing it, everything you do has to be dealt with that way. And again, enforcement, Title VI, various agencies, depending on what state you live in, if you have questions about enforcement, I particularly suggest you might want to go to your local fair housing agency, legal aid, or if you go on the HUD website, things that are called Fair Housing Initiatives Program, of which one I run locally. These are places where you can get some guidance on these things, guidance on where to go and so forth. And again, violations can be acted upon. So let's start to go into some definitions, and we're going to really go into the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about. Okay, recipient. Okay, by recipient, it can mean municipality, it can mean whatever your agency is, who you are, but it's an entity that receives federal financial assistance or operates a program or activity that comes in. And again, this extends to not just the recipient, but to subrecipients. If, for example, you have a program and part of that program is contracted out to another agency, another group, that group has to comply with the language access requirements. So this is something to think of. I've worked with a couple of agencies who had a pretty good plan, but they had a subgrantee. Subgrantee had absolutely nothing, and actually there was some trouble which came out of that because someone came into the subgrantee and was really, because of really language access questions, really lost the services. So it's everybody. And you need to make sure that your subgrantee will also be there. So again, housing authorities, regional nonprofits, housing consumer education centers, municipalities, state agencies, community action agencies, developers who are having companies with private housing companies, but where subsidies are coming in, hospitals. This is a very, very broad mandate. So basically, you got to provide the services. You should have a written language access plan. Actually, it should be LAP, not LEP. And federal agencies can invest complaints and enforce them. And again, there's also, particularly if you're in Massachusetts, your state has probably something similar. There's often an enforcement agency on part of the state. In this case, in Massachusetts, it's the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. Okay, so let's go into the nuts and bolts. Definition: limited English proficiency. It's basically people who don't speak English as their primary language and have a limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. And please understand that's not always obvious. That's not the person who comes into your office and, just says, hello, I'm here about such and such. They may be quite fluent in day-to-day English. It's, if I'm in a Hispanic country, I do fine, dos cervezas, por favor, donde son los baños? Someone might assume that I could really understand Spanish well enough to navigate working in an agency just from initial conversation, but that doesn't mean that I do. So you really need to be able to focus on that and know that. So again, what's an LAP person? Anyone with a limited ability to write, speak, or understand English. And again, it can also be a family member of an English speaker who's involved in the care of that person. As everyone knows, a 3-year-old will probably become bilingual in about a week and a half. The rest of us, it takes a long time. And again, that person doesn't have to be totally, someone can be apparently fluent, but not really fluent. And again, going back to Executive Order 13166, you are allowed flexibility. And that's part of what you're going to be considering in your language access plan. But flexibility in addressing needs should not diminish, should not be used to minimize the obligation that those in need be addressed. In other words, you have to take reasonable steps. So, whereabouts, schools, courts, public, pretty much any place someone walks into and has to do business. You have to have staff that can talk in their language or have access to them in language. And again, by the way, respect the client's culture. I've seen situations where somebody, particularly a busy afternoon, staff are overworked, it's going on and on and on. And somebody walks in and kind of the reaction of the person who's at reception is, oh no, I got something else I got to deal with. So that people need to feel welcome, need to feel respected, and you need to respect the client's culture. So again, public programs, communicate in preferred language, set a language preference to receive vital materials. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what an interpreter means and what are vital documents. So language access plan. Bottom line, it's a roadmap. It's for you. It's your language access plan. It's required by law. You need to have it. But it really is, it's your roadmap on what to do. You do it because it's required. You do it because it helps serve your clients. It's your guide. Be prepared. So how do you write one? How do you write one? How do you even review or rethink the one you have? Okay, I want you to start out and imagine something. You're coming into your office, but you walked in the door looking for service. And at 9 a.m., everybody in your agency has suddenly been replaced by Klingons or some group, basically someone who speaks a language you have no connection with, no idea of. They use letters that you don't recognize. And they have a whole kind of cultural norm that you're not really comfortable with, okay? You walked in the door, you come because you really need to talk to them. And you don't have anything. And by the way, some of the documents are gonna have to be in Klingon, right? And here's a form to fill out. This is a statement of your rights. Here's a form to fill out. It's all, it's all funny squiggly letters. And by the way, you got a few stressors. You got the fact that you park your car outside and you weren't really quite sure of the sign. So are you going to get a ticket? Is it going to get towed while you're in there? You kind of want to know where it is. Maybe you need to know how to use the bathroom. Just very mundane questions. And what you need to do, and oh, by the way, it's not on this one, but I think it's going to be on your slides. The other piece of it is you've heard somewhere or saw on TV somewhere that Klingons are really pretty irritable people. They're not people you want to normally deal with, or at least you don't know how to deal with them. You don't know what's courteous, what isn't courteous. Picture yourself in that situation, and then picture what you would need to change that. And basically, that's your language access plan. That is putting it in writing for you. so that now you're the Klingon, but so that you as the Klingon know how to deal with you as the client walking in the door. So look around. Federal websites, other guidance. There's a whole series of links here. Again, the slides will be available. Look to see what is everyone else doing. Remember that earlier slide I had in Massachusetts where there were a series of what the state language access plans look like. If you have, if you have other, by the way, if you have similar agencies, ask them what they're doing. And kind of take a look at it. The previous slide, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Who are you serving? And take a look at the documents you have. Also, affirmative marketing. How do you reach people? How do you reach people? You find out, for example, if all you speak is Klingon, you're going to have other Klingons walking in the door. You're not going to have people who speak other languages, who aren't comfortable going there. So how are you going to reach out? You have to serve those people. How are you going to get to them? Look for insular groups. And again, see what other people have done. What's in an LAP? Well, basically, there's certain things. You want to notify your clients of their rights. Okay, various ways to do it. You need to let people know, by the way, this is part of your duty. This is part of what you want to address. How are you going to let people know that they have rights? And we'll talk about translation versus interpretation. You're going to need to have both, and they're different, even though they're used as synonyms a lot of the time. And, for the purpose of your language access plan, you're going to have them. Basically, and we'll get back to this translation is simply, it's taking whatever the thing is and as faithfully as possible, rendering it. It could be speech, but it's more often for you, practically speaking, a document as faithfully as possible into the language of the person who's standing there. Klingon to English, if you will. Interpretation is simply communicating and explaining the content. And an interpreter, John goes blah, 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 blah. The interpreter says, John, do say such and such. Summarizing, but trying to get the content of the document or the content of what's being said across. Now, you don't, this isn't the United Nations. You don't need, if you've ever seen, or international conferences where there are these amazing people who almost as one person is talking, render what they're saying into another language. But you do need to, John says blank, 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 blank. You have to do this, this, and this. And then the interpreter John pauses, interpreter says, well, here's what was being said. It's if you will, not as precise in terms of what was said, but it should be precise in getting across the concept. It should be a clear understanding. So what's a vital document? This is an important term you have to think about. Vital documents. A vital document is essentially whatever is critical for ensuring meaningful access for your client. There's something called the safe harbor analysis, which requires in certain languages, vital documents are going to be needed to be translated for language people with limited English proficiency. Real quickly, 1,000 more of the eligible population served, more than 5% of the eligible population. And with LEP populations of basically 5%, of more than 5% of the population and numbered 50 or less or some other things, you can get away with doing a just simply doing interpretation. But again, this is an analysis. I'll show you a little bit more how this works in a moment. But just understand, with a vital document, with a majority population you are serving, those people need to be able to see actually, if will, a copy of that document. Now, by the way, that, just to get into a legality here, the actual, if it's, for example, a contract, an agreement, something that again is vital to the program that they need to sign, the operant version of this, the version that you're normally going to be using, if you will, as a legal version, that's your English version. But the other document, even if it's in Klingon, needs to essentially be such that the person signing that really knows what they're signing. Again, it depends. Applications, certainly, complaint forms, intake forms, notices of your rights, program rights, administrative stuff, appeals letters, assessments to determine eligibility, school documents, standard forms. Again, a vital document is something that's vital to the program. By the way, content on websites should be available. Now, again, there's some fairly simple Google and what have you, where you simply have a little space you click at the top of the website that renders, not always well, but hopefully usably, renders the website in another language. If it's a vital notice, it usually needs to be in the native language. And that's what you have to be figuring, not just that you're going to do it in your language access plan, but how, what mechanism, how are you going to make that happen? Nuts and bolts. So let's just quickly go through what goes into a language plan altogether. Well, statement of purpose, you're going to have it. Why? Who is affected? What does this cover? Quickly, a definition of what you mean by a language, someone with limited English proficiency. What's an LEP population? How are you going to find that out? What are your methods? Okay. Yeah, for one thing, you can do census data. 2010 census floating around. We're doing another one right now. There might be interim uptakes. Perhaps you have an analysis of client populations from the communities. What's happening? Surveys. Do surveys every year or so, or every 6 months. Take a week and have a voluntary survey for anyone coming into your office to find out what would be their language they would like to do business in. Find that out. Get that input, and then really have that written into your plan as something you're regularly going to do. Staff input. In large agencies, your staff, especially receptionists, people out in the field, these are the people who will discover a new group that's come into a language access plan. Somebody, very often, someone moves in from an area, from a country that there has not been a lot of migration from in the past, but they move in, they write back at home, their relatives come, and perhaps without you noticing it, certainly without it showing up in any census, all of a sudden you have a fairly large population of people with limited English proficiency in that area. And the people who are most likely to discover that are going to be the people who you have out in the field. By the way, hearing impaired, don't forget that. You want to describe in your LAP the services you're going to be providing, interpretation, translation, other things. When did you provide them? How do you determine, how do you go about? The 4-factor analysis we'll go back to in a moment, but just you want to have it in there because that's how you make a decision about something. A definition of vital documents, that you want to show that in your language access plan as well. Who is responsible for translating? How are you going to get that done? You want to have a list for the agency, what services you'll provide. You got interpretation, absolutely. Translation, when that will happen. How are you going to, who does that for you? You want to maintain a list of interpreters or translators. Again, you have to inform clients of their legal right coming in the door, sending out a mailing. There has to be some way that people know this is. You want to have a notice that's going to be sent out with any important documents. The iSpeak card, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but just basically something that allows people to show what their language in. Someone walks in the door and says, whatever, Dobre dien, ja говорю по-русски, ni hao, wolchongo rin, whatever it might be. Your person that's sitting at the intake isn't going to necessarily understand that. So you need a way of letting people know. Signage in the lobbies of your rights. What are you going to have there? Identification. How do people identify LEP? What source is going to be used? And again, in-house agency resources, commercial translators, all this sort of stuff. Clients using interpreters. How you go about it. Again, very important thing here, by the way. If you have to do hearings on appeals of something, you have a hearing process that is mandated, that's akin to a court process, and there's a reasonable hearing things. Understand that sometimes there are, what happens is somebody walks in, you maybe have a conversation beforehand, and again, the person seems to be fluent in English, you do the hearing, and particularly if the hearing goes against them, very often you're going to find that they're later have a really valid basis for appeal because they didn't really understand the fine points of what was going on, okay? Again, someone who is seemingly fluent in the language, but again, fluent in a very limited day-to-day manner. So you always, one of the things you always want to make sure is a hearing that you're going to offer the services of an interpreter if they need one, and definitely document the fact that they've either accepted or refused that. So how do you train your staff, existing staff, new hires? Who's responsible for all of this? Supervisors. Again, supervisors should normally be responsible for the day-to-day of things. But again, you may have an LAP officer. And if there's a hearing and grievance process, all of these are pieces that you want to put in. And that's not necessarily all of it, but that's the kind of thinking I want you to do. So again, interpretation versus translation. Interpretation is simply oral communication or just very, or it could be reading literally a document and saying what's in it. Translation is much, much more serious deal. Translation is really you're trying to get across, render the document in that language. So let's talk a little bit more about how to serve and who to serve. This thing called the four-factor analysis. What you're doing is you're looking at the number or proportion of LEP individuals eligible to be served by you and how often you see them, okay? Are they, do you see like one person once a year, or is this something that comes in regularly? Both are important determinants. And again, how, is this a vital document or is this a, whatever, maybe a listing for the agency volleyball tournament? What resources are available and the cost? What can you afford, what you can afford to do? Remember, as I said before, there is some flexibility. I mentioned this at the beginning, but that should not be an excuse for not serving someone. So again, safe harbor concepts. Basically, that applies to translations. For interpretation, there is no safe harbor, okay? So applying the four-factor analysis, you could say, yeah, this group meets those four factors such that I need to do a translation of their stuff. But anybody walking in the door, even if it's the first Klingon who's walked into your agency, anybody there, that still should be able to get service, at least with the interpretation. And you want to review this at regular intervals. So real quickly, this is what it looks like. You've got this again in the slides. It's the size of the language group, 1,000 or more. Yeah, you're going to have to start translating the vital documents. More than 5% of the population, or more than 50, translate vital documents. Less than that, you can perhaps translate a written notice and mention that you can do oral translation of it. And very, very small populations, 5% or less of the population, beneficiaries less than 1,000 in number, you may not need to do, you don't have to do a written translation. So again, this is just a way to look at it. And remember, we're talking about, this is translation, not interpretation. Interpretation, basically, you make every reasonable effort. Have bilingual staff. Also, reach out to sister agencies or agencies that work with that particular population, community groups. Can you get staff from them? You can use an external translation service. And again, this is something that's pretty easy to Google. You can really set this up where you have a contract that you can call them anytime, and over the phone, you can do translation with them, or you can do video translation. It costs a bit more, but it's really handy to have that availability there if you need it. Just real quickly also, that remember, I'm not going to have time to go into too much, but remember the Americans with Disabilities Act can come in here too. Are you doing upgrades? Are you building a new conference room, or certain other things happen? You may need to have capacity for wireless translation devices. Who's an interpreter? This is somebody who's professional, trained in the subject, qualified, and impartial. Now, don't assume all of your staff who are bilingual will necessarily meet these criteria. These are the things, again, this is stuff you have to be considering when this language access plan. This is something, again, you're thinking about all these things and figuring how it's different for every agency, how your agency, your entity can deal with them. Not appropriate, for heaven's sakes, not minor children unless they insist. You don't want to have the 5-year-old kid who is actually quite fluent in both languages, other than the fact they may not know some technical terms, but you don't want to have them talking about the fact that somebody's lost their job, or their house is being foreclosed on, or that so-and-so now has abdominal cancer and is going to have to leave their job. These are things that people insist on kids, fine, but otherwise, no. Understand your service population. Reach out to communities, okay? Reach out to communities. And again, track the languages that are coming in. And again, just don't assume that basic English familiarity means that they're understanding everything. Important thing with signing when you get this in here, okay? American Sign Language and some of the other visual languages are languages. They have their own syntax, they have their own culture. And for somebody who has grown up in that, simply putting things in writing is not always a sufficient solution. You're going to be wanting to look for real interpretation here. And again, this is where, if on a walk-in basis, you probably don't have that within the agency unless you're fortunate to have hired somebody who is also fluent in ASL or whatever. But that's why, again, using the online interpretation agencies can be very, very helpful. Document translation, again, only vital documents. And again, is that available from your funding sources? If you were an agency under state contract, very often the state will already have that document available for you. Or do others have it who do the same thing? Or if not, can you get together to split the cost of doing it? Write in plain language, okay? Have a bank, have a document bank. This is something for an LAP. There should ultimately be a place where every staff member can go, your language access plan, where they can look up and understand, who do I call, what do I do? Supervisors should be really knowledgeable in it. Borrow from sister agencies. And again, have lists of all these people. Do quality control on it. And obviously negotiate a lower rate for phone interview and video services. So again, LAP implementation, key points, I speak cards, signage and lobby. This is an important document. A notice with mailings of documents. Translate vital documents where required. Free interpretation service for clients. And again, 4-factor analysis goes into this. Kids shouldn't translate for parents. Hearings, understand hearings. VRI, video relay, you need to have that thought into it. When you send out a notice, automatically there should be this is an important document. Here's a couple of links, including, by the way, I recently had the pleasure of meeting Gary Haynes. Gary has a kind of a very nice, some very nice forms on his website. Massachusetts, you can go there to find, your state probably has these things too, but just it lets people know what their rights are. I speak cards. I suggest that all staff, anyone who's going to be in contact with anybody else, should be able to have should be able to carry with them these cards. It's the old 2004 census data. But basically, again, you walk into the doors, as I say, there's somebody who says, "Ya Gavaru Poruski," and you don't know what to do. They can point to it. Oh yeah, Russian, great. Lobby signs. Hospitals are pretty good at this. Look at a hospital if you want to see what it looks like. But there should be a sign in your lobby that is obvious that everyone can see, so that it essentially, if they walk in and they're trying to loss, they should look under Klingon there and see, oh yes, this is point to this language at the reception desk. So what does it mean for staff? By the way, I know we're going a little bit late, about 5 more minutes. We'll try and take some questions, and we can go a little bit over if we don't get all the questions covered, but I want to touch on these things. Like I say, this is a fast once over, but it's giving you a sense of what needs to be involved. Under staff are your interface. Your staff have to not only be sensitive to this, trained in it, but also they're your outreach. They're the ones that are going to find that new group that's moved in. There needs to be somebody with oversight. Obviously, again, LEP rights have to be, people have to know about it. There needs to be translation with vital documents. Staff should have that I speak card. They're the agency's eyes and ears, and they should know that they should be reporting back complaints to their supervisors. If they have a question, something they don't know, go to their supervisor. And remember that all people, no matter what language they speak, have to be treated with dignity and respect, okay? And, so this is so important for somebody walking in who's really that nervous about what, doesn't know the culture, whatever, walking in there. Everything is determined on how they're going to view you by that person behind the desk, that first person walking in. COVID, particularly things, hey, no office, right? Office is closed or a limited number of people in. You have to think in the plan, how am I going to get this out to people? Certainly online, but mailings and this sort of thing. How do people know of their rights? Again, think of Zoom meetings. This is or whatever. Any of the other, Skype. There are a bunch of other there's a Microsoft meeting, whatever. But whatever you use, people have to become familiar with it. and have to know they have translation possibilities in there where you can have a translator like we should with this workshop, but haven't. We're going to have to set up separately on the video, but basically that in major languages, you want to have the capacity for translation. Again, the trip where you might have used a telephone or speakerphone with someone walked into the office, you still can use your translation people with a three-way call, sign language, again, Zoom, if necessary, to set up that kind of translation. It doesn't fall on the person walking in, by the way, who speaks ASL. It's not on them to have to figure out how to do this. It's up to you. Translation in virtual meetings and all the things we haven't thought about. And really what you need here, okay? In any large entity, you really need to have somebody who is a language access officer, someone who can take appropriate, has authority to enforce this, because often staff will get sloppy about it, won't bother. And sometimes if you're in one part of the agency and your language access officer is another part of the agency, people won't always listen to what they're saying. So it's important that everyone understands, as part of the language access plan, this person in issues of this nature is not only a resource, but they have enforcement capacity as well. Okay. Finally, Title VI is an unfunded mandate. So when you're budgeting, this is something you need to, how are you going to, language access plan should assume that you're going to include budgeting for whatever needs to be done to meet this, and all proposals, everything you look for. Hire good staff, make it a priority that one of the skills you're looking for is not just this person is good at making widgets, but also somebody at least who's really bilingual. So I thank you very much. Again, here's some other things you can go to. A couple of other nice things is, thank you, Gary. USDA has a pamphlet out, a little manual actually you can download. Intermountain Fair Housing out in Boise has a nice guide. Okay, so questions, and again, we can go a little bit afterwards if anyone has them. Tess, I'm going to ask you now. Again, this is Teresa Dudek, who works with the Fair Housing Civil Rights Conference. Tess, if you could come on, maybe just pass on some of these questions to me, and I'll see what I can do.
Sure. So the first question that came through was regarding if a hospital rents a space to a private practice that is not affiliated, is the renter required to follow the federal requirement and provide an interpreter, or does the private practice need to provide the interpreter?
I'm going to say, if you're a hospital, you've got an attorney, hopefully. And my guess would be you could certainly make a case for it. I don't know. I'm not an attorney myself. I don't know for sure if that would be the case, but I would certainly, almost any question is, we have federal monies coming in one way or the other, so should we? That's one you really want to take seriously and talk to your attorney about that one.
We have a comment from Luis Mata. John, when using a subcontractor or professional external service for interpretation, the agency's expectation should be that the interpreter interprets all that is said during a conversation. The professional hired interpreter should not simply provide a summary of what is said. It is different than simultaneous interpretation. A professional interpreter should interpret what everyone says in the room, whether it is related to the issue or not. A professional interpreter should offer that clarification prior to starting interpreting. So that's just a comment.
Sorry on that one. Of course, I've got a phone trying to do a message answer in the back. My suggestion is, I think that's a great, hopefully if you can download that from the comments, I would say download that from the comments, yes.
And then Xaviera has a question. Can you recommend a site for complaint procedures?
Again, I'm going to say, look, depending upon what, what state you're in, what you can Google, I can probably get some of this stuff. If you have a funding source, they can be a good, certainly a good guide to it. You might have, if someone has something like a Fair Housing Initiatives program in the area or something like that. I've helped out various agencies writing some of theirs. I don't think I can, officially, since I'm publicly funded, recommend any one individual, but if you do a little bit of research, you should be able to pull that up. Talk to your funding source.
Great. And from Bryant, should a private apartment building with affordable units be mandated to provide interpretation? The units are based on a city's inclusionary ordinance.
Again, you have to, it's going to depend to some extent on the city, on what the exact nature of the relationship is. I think to all of these questions, and again, please understand, this could be a day-long workshop. Yeah, we just did this in 40 minutes. But basically, talk to your funding sources about this one, and find out what they have to say, and then possibly you might want to talk to your attorney too. But almost always, if the question is, should I, the answer is going to probably be yes, you should.
We had a question about whether the presentation and slides are going to be available online, and I believe those will be posted at fhcrconference.com/virtual, right?
That's correct.
Okay, I'll put that link right in the chat.
Great.
And then another question from Deborah. How can phone line instructions be reasonably accessible for non-English speakers? Many times the only option for a different language is Spanish. Many times the instructions are complicated.
Yeah, and that's a hard one. I don't have an easy answer to it. It really is, though. I think the thing that should guide you to some extent is, again, you've done that analysis of, remember, that's one of the important things you're doing is what are, I mean, some areas, parts of Massachusetts, which has, sizable non-English proficient populations, but, Portuguese, for example, in some parts of the state is a more common language than Spanish, so that you're going to want to have that as well. Now, again, New York City, what was whatever this huge number of languages, someone would call in and it would be at 9 in the morning, and about 4:30 in the afternoon, they finally get to the message if they had all of the languages listed. So it becomes what is possible, what is realistic. And that's really, I mean, I suppose if someone really wanted to talk to me, I'd be glad to kind of, not get into a major consulting thing, but, if you want to email me, my email is in the slides. I'd be glad to try and get to you a little bit more specifically. But that's really part of what the language access plan is, exactly that. For John Fisher at, at the Western Massachusetts Center for Klingon Immigrants, when I do my plan, that's one of the things I have to set and have to look into how I'm going to do it. And that's really, I suppose, maybe the simple answer is, oh, it's in your plan. Oh, you haven't written the plan yet? Too bad. But it should be in your plan.
Do we have time for one last question? It looks like there's just one left.
Sure.
On what authority do you rely in stating that oral interpretation is sufficient if it summarizes what the non-English speaker is saying rather than providing a word-for-word translation of the oral communication? Shouldn't the interpreter be required to say what the non-English speaker has actually said and not a summary of what was said?
Well, again, you're getting, and I talked about interpretation primarily in the sense of written interpretation, but obviously, again, interpretation can be verbal. And again, you're back, I think to some extent, you're back to your 4-factor analysis there, as to how much it's done. The important thing is that it's done in a way so that the person understands what it is, so that it's, it's not just what John said, a whole lot of things about eligibility and probably, probably whether you were evicted in the last 2 years might have something in there you want to look into. And that's their rendering of what was a very long, very specific concept. That's not appropriate. So even whether it's a summary or whether it's word for word, it still has to get the concept across, number one. Number two, again, does it have to be a translation or should it be a translation? I think that's your 4-factor analysis. And again, all of these are obviously generalities. I helped to write, and I've written for my own agency, a language access plan that thought was great. We updated it. We do regular intakes, and guess what? Somewhere around the 14th of March, we made a left turn into the twilight zone, and a lot of the stuff there is essentially irrelevant, or needs to be rethought a little bit. So it really is a question of what. Go back to that original slide. I walked into the door. This is something that I think we're going to encounter. This is how I would handle it, and always understand that no matter how good a job you do, something's going to come up that doesn't fit. We set?
I think that was the last question.
Okay, well, again, everybody, I thank you very much. Please check with us regularly. We will be having some further workshops, and including this is going to be a very interesting panel on the 27th that really talks about, it's not just for attorneys, but really talks about the question of being an attorney, and if you will, the law in these times, which are really kind of, I was trying to summarize it before, we're living in a time of horror and a time of possibility, and both things are present. And I think we need that. Just the rules again have in some ways been turned upside down and been changed in the last few months. So I think it will be a very interesting workshop. There'll be some other ones coming up ahead. There's going to be one on the impact on people of Asian ancestry, Asian origin, and a couple of others. But please keep looking also, because we will be doing the conference sometime probably in October, and we'll be announcing the date for that shortly. So I thank everybody very much. I wish you a good day, and good luck. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I will try to get back to you as long as there's 500 emails. But thanks, everybody.